Look at this, a black man carrying a Navy bag like he actually earned it. Sergeant Brent Harlow sneered as he ripped the faded canvas bag off Isaiah Mercer's shoulder and hurled it onto the rain-soaked sidewalk hard enough to tear the zipper apart. Burned medals, a cracked wristwatch, an old rescue team photograph, and a sealed letter scattered into a muddy puddle. Isaiah dropped painfully to one knee, reaching toward the letter. "Please, don't touch that. It belongs to a man who died saving others." Brent planted his polished boot squarely on the envelope and laughed. "Oh, now we're telling heroic fairy tales?" He bent down, picked up the faded photograph of a younger black sailor standing beside smoke-covered crewmen, then flicked it back into the water. "You really expect anyone to believe a black guy dressed like this was ever part of the Navy?" The crowd fell silent. Brent dug deeper into the torn bag before holding up a scorched metal identification tag. "No wonder you're carrying this junk," he mocked. "People like you collect military souvenirs because you'll never earn real honor." Isaiah's voice remained calm. "You're making a mistake." Brent snapped the handcuffs around Isaiah's wrists. "The only mistake," he said with a grin, "was thinking a black drifter could fool a police officer." A young Navy lieutenant suddenly rushed forward, staring at the burned identification tag. "Sergeant, stop right now. That code belongs to a classified naval operation." Miles away inside Naval Station Norfolk, Admiral Nathaniel Cross saw one name on an arrest report. His face turned pale. "Who put Isaiah Mercer in handcuffs? If you believe a person's worth should never be judged by appearance, stay with this story until the very end." Before we continue, tell us your city and local time in the comments, and if stories about courage, justice, and hidden heroes inspire you, we'd be honored to have you subscribe. Hours before Sergeant Brent Harlow threw the old Navy bag into the mud, Isaiah Mercer woke before sunrise in a narrow brick house near the Norfolk waterfront. The room was dark except for the blue glow of a clock beside his bed. 8 pat, a du am. Isaiah sat up slowly and pressed one hand against his left thigh. The old injury always hurt most before rain. Some mornings it felt like a dull weight buried inside the bone. Other mornings, like this one, the pain traveled from his hip to his ankle in sharp pulses. He waited for it to settle before standing. At 58, Isaiah still carried himself with the straight-back discipline of a man who had spent years following commands. His hair was closely cropped and touched with gray. A pale scar disappeared beneath the collar of his shirt. His hearing in the right ear was weak, so he had learned to turn his head slightly whenever someone spoke. He made black coffee and stood by the kitchen window, watching cargo lights move across the harbor. On the small table behind him rested the faded Navy bag. The canvas had once been dark blue, but time had washed it into a dull gray. One strap had been repaired twice. Near the bottom, a brown stain had never completely disappeared. Isaiah approached the bag as carefully as if someone were sleeping beside it. He opened the zipper and checked each item. A scorched wristwatch, a photograph of 19 exhausted sailors standing outside a damaged ship, a metal identification tag burned black around the edges, several medals Isaiah had never worn in public, and one sealed letter. The name on the envelope was written in faded ink. Rachel Reese. Isaiah ran his thumb across the handwriting. "Today," he whispered. 27 years had passed since Daniel Reese placed that letter in Isaiah's hand inside a smoke-filled corridor. 27 years since Isaiah promised to deliver it when the time was right. That afternoon, Naval Station Norfolk would hold a memorial ceremony for the USS Resolute incident. Isaiah had received an invitation 3 weeks earlier. It was still lying unopened beneath a stack of bills. He had no intention of standing on a stage. He wanted no applause. He wanted only to find Rachel, return what belonged to her family, and leave before anyone asked questions he did not want to answer. Isaiah placed the letter inside a plastic sleeve, then wrapped the damaged watch in a clean cloth. He wore a faded brown jacket, work pants, and boots that had seen too many winters. His old pickup truck refused to start. The engine clicked twice and went silent. Isaiah stared at the steering wheel, then gave a tired smile. "Not today, huh?" He lifted the Navy bag over his shoulder and walked toward the bus stop. The morning air smelled of rain, diesel, and salt water. On the number 17 bus, most passengers kept their eyes on their phones. Isaiah chose a seat near the rear. 2 stops later, an elderly woman climbed aboard carrying grocery bags. Every seat was taken. Isaiah immediately stood. "Ma'am, you can sit here." She looked at his stiff leg. "You need it more than I do. I've had enough practice standing." She smiled and accepted. A young man across the aisle watched Isaiah closely. He wore a veteran support bracelet and kept rubbing his palms against his jeans. When the bus passed beneath the roar of a low-flying military aircraft, the young man suddenly froze. His breathing became fast. Isaiah recognized the look. He moved slowly, keeping his voice calm. "Look at the floor," he said. "Pick one color." The man swallowed. "Gray. Good. Now find 3 things that are gray." The man pointed at the floor, a seat frame, and the sky outside. "That's it," Isaiah said. "Keep breathing. You're on a bus in Norfolk. Nothing else is happening right now." Within a minute, the man's shoulders loosened. "You military?" he asked. Isaiah adjusted the old bag. "A long time ago." "What branch?" Isaiah looked toward the harbor. "Just a mechanic who spent too much time around ships." The elderly woman studied him from her seat. She seemed unconvinced, but she said nothing. Isaiah left the bus near a small military surplus store 3 blocks from the naval station. He needed a stronger protective case for Daniel's letter. Rain had begun to fall, and the thin plastic sleeve would not be enough. Across the street, Sergeant Brent Harlow sat behind the wheel of a patrol car. His partner, Officer Kyle Denton, was reading a report from the dashboard computer. The surplus store had reported a theft 30 minutes earlier. The suspect was described as a white male in his 20s wearing a red sweatshirt. Brent barely glanced at the description. His attention fixed on Isaiah, an older black man in worn clothing, a faded navy bag over one shoulder, walking away from a military supply store. Brent leaned forward. "There!" Kyle looked up. "That's not the description. Descriptions change. The suspect was 25. That man is at least 50. Brent started the engine. Thieves lie. Witnesses get confused. Kyle watched Isaiah stop beneath an awning and carefully cover the navy bag with his jacket to protect it from the rain. "He's not running," Kyle said. Brent shifted the patrol car into drive. "They never run until they know you're watching." The cruiser rolled forward. Isaiah heard the engine behind him, but he did not turn around until red and blue lights flashed across the wet storefront windows. Brent lowered the window. "Hey, you with the navy bag, stop right there." Isaiah slowly turned. For one brief moment, his hand tightened around the worn strap. Then he saw Brent's expression and understood that this was not going to be a simple question. Isaiah slowly turned toward the flashing patrol lights, keeping both hands where the officers could see them. "Good morning, officers." Sergeant Brent Harlow stepped out of the cruiser, adjusting his duty belt with deliberate confidence. Officer Kyle Denton followed several steps behind, his eyes shifting between Isaiah and the report still open on the patrol car's computer. Brent didn't return the greeting. "You heard me," he snapped. "Take the bag off your shoulder and put it on the ground." Isaiah calmly slipped the worn navy bag from his shoulder and lowered it gently onto the wet sidewalk. "Careful," he said quietly. "There are personal belongings inside." Brent smirked. "Oh, I'm sure there are." He circled Isaiah once, looking him up and down. Old jacket, cheap boots, carrying military gear around a naval station. He shook his head. "You fit the picture perfectly." Kyle glanced at the dispatch description again. "Sergeant, the suspect was reported wearing a red sweatshirt." Brent waved him off. "I'm talking to him." Isaiah reached slowly into his jacket. "I have identification." Brent instantly raised his voice. "Hands where I can see them." Isaiah immediately stopped. "My wallet is in my inside pocket." "I didn't ask." Several pedestrians slowed to watch. Isaiah waited until Brent finally nodded. He carefully removed his wallet and handed over a veteran identification card along with the invitation to the memorial ceremony at Naval Station Norfolk. Brent barely looked at either one. "A memorial invitation?" he scoffed. "Anybody with a printer can make one." Kyle examined the embossed seal. "It actually looks authentic." Brent folded the invitation and stuffed it into his own pocket. "We'll decide what's authentic." Isaiah remained composed. "I'm simply attending today's ceremony." Brent laughed loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "You?" He pointed toward the naval station visible in the distance. "That place is full of sailors who actually serve." His voice dripped with contempt. "And then there's you, walking around with an old navy bag hoping people will salute you." A few people exchanged uncomfortable glances. Isaiah kept his eyes on Brent. "I've never asked anyone to salute me." "No," Brent replied, stepping closer until they were only inches apart. "People like you usually settle for sympathy." Without asking permission, Brent grabbed the navy bag and pulled hard. The worn shoulder strap snapped. The bag slammed onto the sidewalk. The zipper burst completely open. Its contents scattered across the rain-soaked concrete. The burned watch rolled toward the curb. Several metals slid into a shallow puddle. The old photograph landed face up. The sealed letter floated in dirty water. Isaiah instinctively dropped to one knee. No. His voice was sharper than before. He reached toward the envelope. Brent shoved him backward with one hand. I said, don't move. Isaiah winced as his injured leg struck the pavement. He ignored the pain and stared only at the soaked letter. Please, he said, almost pleading. Don't touch that. Brent casually stepped forward. His polished boot came down directly onto the envelope. The wet paper crumpled beneath the sole. It belongs to a man who gave everything for this country. Brent looked down with open amusement. So did half the cemetery. He bent over and picked up the old rescue team photograph. 19 exhausted sailors stood shoulder to shoulder beside a smoke-blackened ship. Near the center stood a younger Isaiah. Brent studied it for barely a second before tossing it back into the puddle. Niche costume. Isaiah's jaw tightened. That's not a costume. Kyle quietly picked up one of the medals. Sergeant, these look old. They also look easy to fake. Isaiah slowly stood despite the pain. I've answered every question. I've cooperated. I've shown identification. What exactly am I accused of? Brent grinned. Being somewhere you don't belong. His hand dug deeper into the torn bag. Suddenly, his fingers stopped. He pulled out a blackened metal identification tag with strange engraved numbers. Even after years of fire damage, the markings remained visible. Kyle frowned. I've never seen one like that. Before Brent could respond, a young Navy lieutenant hurried across the street from a nearby government building. She froze the instant she saw the identification tag. Oh me God. Brent looked at her. You know this thing? She stepped closer without taking her eyes off the metal tag. Sergeant. Her voice became urgent. You need to stop this immediately. Brent folded his arms. Why? Because that identification code belongs to a classified naval operation. The crowd fell silent. For a brief moment, even Brent hesitated. Then his pride took over. Classified? He laughed. Convenient story. The lieutenant reached for her phone. I need to notify Naval Station Norfolk right now. Brent blocked her path. I'll handle police business. He turned back toward Isaiah. So now you're carrying classified military property too? Isaiah spoke calmly. Call the base. They can verify everything. Instead, Brent grabbed Isaiah's arm, twisted it behind his back, and slammed a pair of steel handcuffs around his wrists. You can explain it from a holding cell. As Isaiah was pushed toward the patrol car, he looked back at the torn Navy bag lying open in the rain. His eyes rested on the soaked letter. His voice was barely above a whisper. You have no idea whose sacrifice you just stepped on. Miles away, inside Naval Station Norfolk, an operations officer rushed into Admiral Nathaniel Cross's office carrying an urgent incident report. The Admiral read one line. His expression instantly changed. Isaiah Mercer. He stood so abruptly that his chair crashed backward against the wall. Bring me every report. Now. The ride to the Norfolk Police Department was silent. Rain drummed steadily against the patrol car while Isaiah Mercer sat in the back seat with his hands cuffed behind him. Water dripped from his torn jacket onto the plastic seat beneath him. His eyes never left the old Navy bag lying on the floorboard beside Officer Kyle Denton. The broken zipper hung open, exposing the soaked letter Isaiah had tried so desperately to protect. Brent glanced into the rearview mirror with a smug smile. Funny thing about liars, he said. They always think staying calm makes them look innocent. Isaiah answered without anger. And good officers know the difference between calm and guilt. Brent's smile disappeared. Inside the station, Isaiah was escorted into the booking area as several officers looked up from their desks. Some noticed his veteran identification card. Others noticed only the worn clothes and the handcuffs. Brent tossed the Navy bag onto the evidence counter. Possible stolen military property, he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. The suspect claims he's some forgotten Navy hero. A few officers chuckled. Isaiah remained standing quietly. The desk sergeant opened the intake form. Occupation? Marine engine mechanic. Military status? Retired. Before Isaiah could continue, Brent interrupted. Put unverified. Kyle looked up. Sergeant, he did provide a veteran ID. Brent shrugged. Could be fake until proven otherwise. Kyle hesitated but said nothing. Isaiah watched every word being typed onto the screen. Then he noticed another line. Transient. His eyebrows narrowed. I never said I was homeless. Brent leaned against the counter. You've got old clothes, no working vehicle, and you're wandering around the naval station carrying classified property. He smirked. Looks close enough. Isaiah spoke firmly. Facts matter. So does the truth. Brent ignored him. Inside the interview room, Isaiah sat alone beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. Minutes later, Brent entered carrying the burned identification tag. He placed it on the metal table. Start talking. Isaiah looked at the tag for several seconds. I can't explain everything. Brent folded his arms. Because it's stolen? Because some of it was classified. Brent laughed. There it is. The favorite excuse. Isaiah slowly met his eyes. Call Naval Station Norfolk. They'll verify my identity. Brent leaned closer. If your story checks out, maybe. But if you're lying, I'm adding federal charges. Isaiah didn't respond. His silence only fueled Brent's confidence. Outside the room, Kyle quietly reviewed Brent's draft report. His stomach tightened. According to the report, the suspect refused identification. False. The suspect became physically aggressive. False. The suspect attempted to conceal military evidence. False. Kyle had watched every second. None of it had happened. He looked through the interview room window at Isaiah sitting alone. Something didn't feel right. Kyle walked back into Brent's office. Sergeant. Brent never looked up. What? The report is inaccurate. It says he resisted. He didn't. Brent finally raised his head. You still knew enough to think paperwork tells the whole story? Kyle remained silent. Brent lowered his voice. You write reports that support good arrests. You don't hand defense attorneys gifts. Kyle slowly walked away, unconvinced. Meanwhile, 68-year-old Thomas Vale hurried through the station lobby, carrying a weathered photograph in his trembling hands. I need to speak with the man you arrested. The receptionist frowned. Name? Isaiah Mercer. I'm sorry, sir. You can't. Thomas placed the photograph on the counter. The picture showed 19 sailors standing outside a heavily damaged warship. A younger Isaiah stood near the center. I know that man. I owe him my life. The receptionist called for Brent. Seconds later, Brent appeared. We're done taking statements. Thomas pointed toward the holding area. You're making a terrible mistake. Brent folded his arm. If he's your friend, I'd leave before you get involved too. Thomas stared at him in disbelief. You have absolutely no idea who you've handcuffed. Brent answered coldly. I know exactly what I arrested. No, Thomas replied quietly. You arrested a man who spent his life protecting people who never even knew his name. Brent motioned toward the exit. Thomas was escorted outside before he could say another word. Standing in the rain, Thomas immediately pulled out an old flip phone. His fingers shook as he dialed a number he hadn't used in years. When the call connected, he spoke only one sentence. We found the harbor ghost. Across town, Commander Rachel Reese was preparing for the USS Resolute memorial ceremony when her office phone rang. After listening for less than 30 seconds, the color drained from her face. What did you say? My father's Navy bag? She grabbed her uniform cap and rushed out the door. At Naval Station Norfolk, Admiral Nathaniel Cross unlocked a secure cabinet hidden behind a bookshelf inside his office. Only 3 people on the base knew it existed. He removed a thick, classified file covered with decades of dust. Stamped across the front were the words, Us, Resolute. Below them, another name, Isaiah Mercer. The Admiral opened the first page. His hands trembled. Without another second of hesitation, he reached for the secure phone. Get me the Norfolk police chief immediately. No delays. And whatever happens, he paused, staring at Isaiah's younger face in the faded photograph. Do not let them move Isaiah Mercer out of that station. By noon, the story had already spread across Norfolk. A local news station aired cell phone footage of Isaiah being handcuffed outside the surplus store. The video began only after Brent had thrown the Navy bag onto the sidewalk, making it appear as though police had interrupted a dangerous suspect. The headline on the screen read, Police detain man carrying possible stolen naval property. Inside the station, Sergeant Brent Harlow watched the report with quiet satisfaction. See, he muttered, the public already knows who the bad guy is. Officer Kyle Denton didn't answer. His attention stayed on the evidence log displayed on his computer. Something was wrong. The burned identification tag had been entered into evidence. The torn Navy bag had been entered. The medals had been entered. But the old cassette recorder Isaiah had carried inside a small wooden box was missing. Kyle frowned. I thought there was another item. Brent didn't even look over. There wasn't. I remember a wooden box. You remember wrong. Before Kyle could respond, Brent's phone rang. After a brief conversation, he stood and grabbed his jacket. We're getting a search warrant. Kyle looked surprised. For what? Brent smiled. If he's carrying classified property, there's probably more hidden at his house. 45 minutes later, 2 patrol cars stopped outside Isaiah's modest waterfront home. The front porch overlooked a small workshop where old boat engines sat neatly arranged in rows. Wind chimes made from worn brass propellers swayed gently in the sea breeze. Brent stepped onto the porch and pounded on the door. No answer. He won't be back anytime soon, Malcolm Reed called from the neighboring workshop. Malcolm, a 34-year-old mechanic who had worked beside Isaiah for nearly a decade, wiped grease from his hands. What do you need? Brent flashed the warrant. We're searching the property. Malcolm looked stunned. For Isaiah? Unless another black man around here carries an old Navy bag. Malcolm's expression hardened. You've got the wrong man. Brent ignored him. Within minutes, officers were pulling open cabinets, emptying drawers, and removing boxes from shelves. One officer accidentally knocked over a wooden model ship. It shattered across the floor. Malcolm instinctively stepped forward. Careful! Brent blocked his path. Stay back. Malcolm stared at the broken pieces. Isaiah built that. For a kid whose father never came home from deployment, Brent didn't care. He continued searching. Inside an old steel cabinet, Kyle found neatly organized binders filled with maintenance records for fishing boats. Isaiah had repaired free of charge for disabled veterans. There were thank you letters, children's drawings, holiday cards, nothing remotely suspicious. Another officer called out from the back room. Sergeant! Brent walked over. Inside an old storage trunk lay a carefully folded Navy uniform, sealed inside protective plastic. Beside it rested a framed group photograph from decades earlier. Brent picked it up. The same faces, the same smoke-blackened uniforms, the same young Isaiah standing among them. Kyle looked closely. Every man in the picture wore authentic rescue insignia. This doesn't look fake, Brent shrugged. Photos can be printed. Then Kyle noticed another object beneath the frame. A rolled blueprint. He carefully opened it. It showed part of the USS Resolute's engine room. Handwritten notes covered the margins. Valve numbers. Emergency escape routes. Fire containment markings. Brent immediately grabbed it. There's our evidence. Kyle frowned. Or maybe they're personal notes. They're classified. You don't know that. I know enough. As officers continued searching, Malcolm quietly walked toward Isaiah's workbench. Mounted above it were dozens of photographs. Isaiah shaking hands with elderly veterans. Isaiah repairing boats. Isaiah teaching teenagers how to rebuild engines. Isaiah standing beside families who had lost loved ones at sea. No awards, no speeches, no spotlight, just years of quiet service. Malcolm turned toward Brent. You know what he charged Gold Star families for repairs? Brent didn't answer. Nothing. What about disabled veterans? Nothing. He spent every Saturday fixing engines for people who couldn't afford it. Brent continued filling evidence boxes. I don't arrest saints. I arrest suspects. Kyle's phone vibrated. A secure message had arrived from Naval Station Norfolk. Request immediate preservation of all evidence related to Isaiah Mercer. Admiral's office en route. Kyle looked up. Sergeant. Brent held up one hand. I don't take orders from admirals. At that moment, another officer walked out carrying a small cedar box. I found this behind the workbench. The box was old but beautifully crafted. Its brass latch had darkened with age. Brent opened it. Inside rested a cassette tape labeled only with one date. October 18. Nothing else. Kyle immediately remembered. This is the box from the Navy bag. Brent slowly closed the lid. No, it isn't. Kyle stared at him. I saw it. Brent stepped closer until they were face to face. No, officer. You think you saw it? He casually slipped the cedar box beneath his own evidence bag instead of placing it into the official inventory. Kyle's pulse quickened. Sergeant. Brent's voice became cold. If that tape disappears, nobody asks questions. If it stays, he glanced toward the patrol cars. This case becomes a political circus. For the first time since joining the department, Kyle realized he wasn't watching a mistaken arrest unfold. He was watching evidence disappear. As Brent zipped his evidence bag shut, he never noticed the small security camera mounted above Isaiah's workshop door. Its tiny red recording light continued blinking. Everything had just been captured. The holding cell was unusually quiet. Isaiah Mercer sat on the narrow metal bench, his cuffed hands resting calmly in his lap. The torn Navy bag had been taken away, but in his mind he could still see Daniel Reese's letter soaking in the rain. The sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway. The steel door opened. Commander Rachel Reese stepped inside, still wearing her Navy dress uniform. Her eyes immediately settled on Isaiah. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Isaiah stood. I'm sorry, he said softly. Rachel frowned. For what? I couldn't protect your father's letter. Her expression changed instantly. You've been arrested, and you're apologizing to me? Isaiah lowered his eyes. It should have reached you dry. Rachel felt her throat tighten. She had spent most of her life hearing stories about Isaiah Mercer, not from newspapers, not from military records, from her father. Daniel Reese had written about one man again and again, his closest friend, the man he trusted more than anyone aboard the USS Resolute. Yet standing before her was not the decorated hero she had imagined, only a tired black man wearing worn-out work clothes and bruises around his wrists. Rachel stepped closer. "You carried that letter for 27 years. Isaiah nodded once. "I promised him. Why didn't you give it to us sooner?" Isaiah took a slow breath. "Because grief changes children. You were 8 years old. I wanted you to remember your father as your father, not as the man who died in front of me." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "My mother always said someone had been watching over us." Isaiah looked away. "That wasn't me. It was Daniel. He made me promise." Rachel slowly reached into her pocket and placed a folded photograph on the table between them. It showed Daniel Reese laughing beside Isaiah on the deck of the USS Resolute. "You kept every promise." Isaiah smiled faintly. He tried. Outside the interview room, Sergeant Brent watched through the glass. "They're putting on quite a performance." Officer Kyle didn't answer. His attention was fixed on the security footage he had quietly copied from Isaiah's workshop before Brent could erase it. The timestamp showed the entire search. Every evidence box, every officer, every movement. Then came the moment. The cedar box. Kyle watched Brent remove it from official evidence before slipping it into his personal equipment bag. Kyle replayed the clip, then replayed it again. His heartbeat quickened. That wasn't a mistake. That was theft. Across town, Thomas Vale stood inside the meeting room of a small veterans association. 7 elderly men and 1 woman sat around a scarred wooden table. Each had survived the USS Resolute disaster. Each carried scars that never truly healed. Thomas placed the faded rescue photograph in the center. "I found him." No one asked who. They already knew. One elderly sailor whispered, "Isaiah?" Thomas nodded. "They arrested him this morning." The room fell silent. Another survivor slowly removed an old cassette tape from his jacket pocket. "I wondered if we'd ever need this." Thomas carefully accepted it. The label had nearly faded away. Only one handwritten sentence remained. "Engine room channel B. It still works?" "It did last year." Thomas looked around the room. "We stayed silent because he asked us to. He protected everyone. But if we stay silent today," he looked down at the photograph, "then we become part of what they're doing to him." Every survivor nodded. Meanwhile, Admiral Nathaniel Cross stood inside a secure conference room at Naval Station Norfolk. The classified USS Resolute file lay open before him. An intelligence officer quietly entered. "Sir, we've confirmed the arrest." Cross never looked up. "What about the identification tag?" "It matches Operation Harbor Shield." Cross closed his eyes. "I was afraid of that." The officer hesitated. "Sir, should we continue protecting the classified sections?" The Admiral stared through the window toward the harbor. For 27 years, Isaiah Mercer protected this Navy. He never once asked for recognition. He slowly closed the file. But today, we protect him. At the police station, Rachel prepared to leave. Before walking out, she turned back toward Isaiah. "There's something I've never understood." Isaiah looked up. "My father always told me you disappeared after the explosion. You never came back." Isaiah remained quiet for several seconds. Finally, he answered, "I did come back." Rachel frowned. "What do you mean?" "I attended his funeral. You were there. I stood behind the last row. You never saw me." "I wanted to. But I made your father another promise." "What promise?" Isaiah's voice grew almost inaudible. "That your family would never have to carry my burden along with his." Rachel could no longer hold back her tears. She stepped forward and embraced him through the narrow space between the handcuffs. Outside the room, even Kyle looked away. Brent, however, rolled his eyes. Touching, Rachel immediately faced him. "There is something you should know. My father never blamed Isaiah. He trusted him with his life." Brent shrugged. "That may impress you. It doesn't erase stolen military property." Rachel stepped closer until only inches separated them. "My father didn't leave that bag to a thief. He entrusted it to the bravest man he ever served with." Before Brent could answer, Kyle's phone vibrated. A secure, encrypted message from Internal Affairs appeared on the screen. "Do not release or modify any evidence related to Isaiah Mercer. A special review team is en route." Kyle looked toward Brent, then toward the hidden copy of the workshop footage safely stored inside his cloud backup. For the first time, he realized the truth no longer depended on one missing evidence box. It had already begun finding its own way into the light. By late afternoon, the Norfolk Police Department no longer felt like a normal station. Uniformed officers whispered in hallways. Command staff moved quickly between offices. Every few minutes, another phone rang. Nobody seemed to know exactly what was happening, only that something much larger than an ordinary arrest was unfolding. Inside the evidence room, Officer Kyle Denton stood alone, staring at the inventory screen. The cedar box still wasn't listed. Neither was the cassette tape. He took a slow breath before opening the secure folder on his laptop. The workshop security footage played once more. There it was, Brent removing the cedar box, looking over both shoulders, sliding it into his personal equipment bag. Kyle paused the video. There could be no misunderstanding, no innocent explanation. He copied the footage onto an encrypted drive just as the door opened. Police Chief Eleanor Brooks entered with 2 internal affairs investigators. Officer Denton. Kyle immediately stood. "Chief." She looked around the room. "I've been informed you raised concerns about today's arrest." Kyle hesitated only briefly. "Yes, ma'am. Were your concerns documented?" "No." "Why not?" Kyle answered honestly. "Because my supervising sergeant ordered me to stay quiet." The chief studied his face. "Show me everything." Without another word, Kyle inserted the encrypted drive into the computer. The room fell silent as the video played. One investigator leaned closer. "Pause." Kyle froze the frame, showing Brent hiding the cedar box. The investigator looked toward the chief. "This alone justifies a criminal investigation." Chief Brooks nodded slowly. "And that's only one part of the problem." Before anyone could continue, another officer hurried into the room. "Chief, the Admiral has arrived." Every conversation stopped. Outside the station, 3 dark Navy vehicles rolled quietly into the parking lot. No sirens, no flashing lights, only quiet authority. Admiral Nathaniel Cross stepped out first, followed by Commander Rachel Reese and 4 senior naval officers. Their dress uniforms drew every eye in the parking lot. Brent watched from the lobby window. So they actually came. He forced a confident smile. "Good. They'll clear this up." Chief Brooks met the Admiral at the entrance. Admiral Cross. "Chief Brooks, we appreciate your cooperation." The Admiral's expression remained unreadable. "I'm not here as a courtesy visit. I'm here because one of my sailors was handcuffed today." Brent stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, the suspect claimed military connections but couldn't verify ownership of classified property." Nathaniel Cross slowly turned toward him. "Did you call the naval station as requested?" Brent hesitated. "No, sir." "Did you verify his identification?" "No, sir." "Did you preserve all evidence?" Brent answered more quietly. "Yes, sir." Kyle lowered his eyes. The Admiral noticed. He walked directly toward Kyle. "You disagree?" Kyle looked at Chief Brooks. She gave a slight nod. "Tell the truth." Kyle took a steady breath. Not all evidence was preserved. The lobby became completely silent. Brent's face hardened. "What are you talking about?" Kyle didn't look at him. "I have video showing evidence removed from inventory." Chief Brooks immediately addressed Brent. "Sergeant, I am ordering you to surrender your equipment bag." Brent laughed nervously. "This is ridiculous. It contains department property. It also contains whatever you placed inside it during the search." The internal affairs investigators stepped closer. For the first time all day, Brent looked uncertain. Slowly, he handed over the bag. An investigator opened it. Inside were Brent's notebook, flashlight, gloves, and the small cedar box. Nobody spoke. Chief Brooks looked directly at Brent. "Would you like to explain why this wasn't entered into evidence?" Brent searched for an answer. I intended to log it later." The explanation sounded weak even to him. Commander Rachel Reese quietly opened the cedar box. Inside rested the cassette tape exactly where Isaiah had left it. Rachel looked at Thomas Vale, who had just arrived with the surviving USS Resolute crew. Thomas nodded. "We have another copy." He carefully removed his own cassette from his jacket. The original stayed with Isaiah. "This one stayed with us." Rachel looked at the 2 tapes. "Play them." Minutes later, an old cassette player was placed on the conference table. Dust was brushed from the speakers. The room filled with static. Then came shouting, metal tearing, emergency alarms, someone yelling coordinates. Another voice screamed for medical assistance. Suddenly, one calm voice cut through the chaos. "This is Chief Petty Officer Isaiah Mercer. I'm entering engine room 2. If anyone receives this transmission..." A violent explosion interrupted him. Several officers instinctively flinched. The recording continued. "I've located survivors." "Daniel," a weak voice answered. "I'm here." Isaiah spoke again. "I'm getting all of you home." Then Daniel Reese's exhausted voice filled the room. "If I don't make it, Rachel deserves the truth." Isaiah answered immediately. "You'll tell her yourself." Daniel coughed heavily. "If I can't, promise me." A long pause. Finally, Isaiah said the words that had guided his entire life. "I promise." The tape ended with roaring flames and the sound of steel collapsing. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Several officers quietly wiped tears from their eyes. Chief Brooks looked across the room. "So that letter," Rachel nodded. "My father wrote it before Isaiah carried him out." Thomas spoke next. "Isaiah went back into the fire 3 more times. He rescued 19 sailors. Then he disappeared before the cameras arrived." Admiral Cross slowly removed another document from the classified file. He placed it on the table. The official record remained sealed because the operation itself was classified. He looked toward every officer in the room. But the courage was always real. Brent stared at the table in disbelief. The evidence he had mocked all day. The old bag, the burned tag, the photograph, the letter, the cassette. Every piece fit together perfectly. And every piece proved Isaiah Mercer had told the truth from the very beginning. Chief Brooks broke the silence. "Bring Mr. Mercer here." The internal affairs investigator quietly corrected her. "No, Chief." He glanced toward the holding cells. "I think, after everything we've just heard, we should go to him." The corridor leading to the holding cells had never felt so long. Chief Eleanor Brooks walked in front, followed by Admiral Nathaniel Cross, Commander Rachel Reese, Thomas Vale, the surviving USS Resolute crew, and 2 internal affairs investigators. No one spoke. The only sound was the echo of polished shoes against the concrete floor. At the end of the hallway, Isaiah Mercer remained seated on the narrow steel bench. He looked up as the footsteps stopped outside his cell. For a brief second, he assumed another round of questioning was about to begin. Instead, he saw the Admiral. Nathaniel Cross removed his service cap. Every Navy officer behind him did the same. Isaiah slowly stood. The Admiral looked directly into his eyes. Chief Petty Officer Isaiah Mercer. His voice carried through the hallway. "On behalf of the United States Navy, I owe you an apology." The words stunned every officer nearby. Isaiah blinked once. "You don't owe me anything, Admiral." "Yes," Cross answered quietly. "We do. For 27 years, your service remained hidden. And today," he glanced toward the bruises around Isaiah's wrists, "we allowed the man who carried that burden to be treated like a criminal." Chief Brooks stepped forward holding a ring of keys. Her hands trembled slightly. "I'm deeply sorry, Mr. Mercer." She unlocked the handcuffs. The heavy steel bracelets dropped into her hands with a metallic click that echoed through the hallway. Red marks remained around Isaiah's wrists. Chief Brooks looked at them for several seconds before speaking. No citizen should ever have been placed in these because of assumptions. And certainly not a man who earned the respect of this country. Isaiah gently rubbed one wrist. "I appreciate your words, Chief. But apologies matter most when they change something." Chief Brooks nodded. "They will." Behind the group, Sergeant Brent Harlow stood between 2 internal affairs investigators. His duty belt had already been removed. His badge was gone. His sidearm had been secured. For the first time all day, there was no arrogance left in his face. Only uncertainty. Brent looked toward Isaiah. The words refused to come. Isaiah met his eyes without anger. "You stepped on a letter." Brent swallowed. "I know. You mocked men who never came home. I know. You never asked who they were." Brent lowered his head. "No." Isaiah's voice remained calm. "That's the part you'll remember longest." Silence filled the hallway. Even the investigators looked away. Commander Rachel Reese approached, carrying the carefully dried envelope inside a protective evidence sleeve. The paper was wrinkled from rain, but still intact. She held it with both hands. "I think this belongs to me now." Isaiah smiled gently. "It always did." Rachel hesitated. "Would you stay while I read it?" Isaiah nodded. "If your father could choose, I think that's exactly what he'd want." The group moved into a nearby conference room. No reporters were allowed inside. No cameras. Only the people whose lives had been shaped by the events aboard the USS Resolute. Rachel carefully opened the envelope. The room became completely silent. Her father's handwriting filled the page. "My dearest Rachel, if this letter reaches you, it means another man kept a promise I could no longer keep. His name is Isaiah Mercer. If anyone ever tells you heroes always wear medals, don't believe them. The bravest man I ever knew carried frightened sailors instead of his own pride. If I don't return home, remember this. You never owe Isaiah your gratitude. You owe him the chance to live the peaceful life he never allowed himself to ask for." Rachel's voice broke before she reached the final paragraph. Tears rolled freely down her face. She folded the letter against her chest. "I spent my whole life wondering why Dad trusted one person above everyone else." She looked at Isaiah. "Now I understand." Thomas Vale slowly stood. "So do the rest of us." One by one, the surviving sailors rose from their seats. Each man stepped toward Isaiah. None of them offered speeches. None of them tried to describe what words could never fully explain. Instead, the oldest survivor quietly raised his right hand. Then another, until every surviving sailor stood at attention. They saluted. Isaiah immediately shook his head. "No, you don't salute me." Thomas smiled through tears. "We're not saluting rank. We're saluting the man who walked back into a burning engine room when the rest of us couldn't." Isaiah's composure finally cracked. His eyes glistened. For 27 years, he had avoided ceremonies, interviews, medals, and recognition. Yet this silent salute from the men he had saved carried more weight than every award he had refused. Admiral Cross slowly opened the classified USS Resolute file one final time. Inside rested a document signed decades earlier. He placed it before Isaiah. It has remained sealed until today. Isaiah read only the first line, "Recommendation for the Navy Cross." He quietly closed the folder again. "I told them not to submit this." "I know," the Admiral replied. "They honored your request, but they also kept the recommendation." He looked around the room. "The time for silence is over." Outside the conference room, television crews had begun gathering in front of the police station after word spread that senior Navy leadership had arrived. Across social media, the original arrest video was rapidly being replaced by a different recording, the workshop security footage. Millions would soon watch Sergeant Brent Harlow remove the cedar box from official evidence. The public story was changing by the minute, and before the sun set over Norfolk Harbor, the entire country would learn the name Isaiah Mercer. Before sunset, every major television network in the country had picked up the story. The first video showed Sergeant Brent Harlow throwing Isaiah Mercer's Navy bag onto the rain-soaked sidewalk. The second showed him removing the cedar box during the search of Isaiah's home. The third changed everything. It was the recording from inside the Norfolk Police Department. Standing before dozens of officers, Admiral Nathaniel Cross could be heard saying, "Today, the United States Navy apologizes to Chief Petty Officer Isaiah Mercer." Within hours, millions had watched the videos. Veterans organizations issued public statements. Former sailors shared faded photographs of Isaiah from decades earlier. Families of USS Resolute survivors began telling stories that had remained private for nearly 3 decades. The man who had spent 27 years avoiding recognition could no longer remain anonymous. At Norfolk Police Headquarters, Chief Eleanor Brooks stepped onto a temporary podium surrounded by local and national reporters. Cameras flashed continuously. Behind her stood representatives from Internal Affairs, the Mayor's Office, and the United States Navy. Chief Brooks unfolded a prepared statement but looked up before reading it. "Today," she began, "our department failed a citizen who deserved our respect long before he entered this building." She paused. "The investigation has established that Mr. Isaiah Mercer fully cooperated with officers. He committed no crime. The evidence used to justify his detention was misrepresented." She looked directly into the cameras. "On behalf of the Norfolk Police Department, I offer Mr. Mercer my sincere and unconditional apology." Questions immediately erupted from the crowd. "Chief, has Sergeant Harlow been suspended? Will criminal charges be filed? Was evidence intentionally concealed?" Chief Brooks answered calmly. "Sergeant Brent Harlow has been relieved of duty effective immediately. His law enforcement authority has been suspended. An independent criminal investigation into evidence, tampering, falsification of official reports, and misconduct under color of authority is now underway." She refused to comment further. Inside another conference room, Brent sat alone across from 2 Internal Affairs investigators. His badge rested on the table. "So," one investigator said quietly, "this is your final opportunity. Why did you remove the cedar box?" Brent rubbed his face. "I thought it would complicate the case." "That's not an answer." He closed his eyes. "I was already committed. When I realized he was telling the truth, I'd already written the report." The room remained silent. "So you doubled down?" Brent nodded slowly. "I convinced myself I could fix it." Instead, he had destroyed his career. Across town, hundreds of people gathered outside Naval Station Norfolk. No official announcement had been made, yet veterans kept arriving. Then active-duty sailors. Then families carrying small American flags. Word had spread through text messages, veteran groups, and social media. Nobody organized the gathering. People simply came. As Isaiah's vehicle approached the main gate, something unexpected happened. The guards standing at attention recognized the Admiral's staff car. The barrier lifted. Then one young sailor noticed Isaiah sitting in the back seat. His eyes widened. Without waiting for orders, He raised a salute. Another sailor followed. Then another. By the time the vehicle reached the ceremonial plaza, 2 long rows of Navy personnel stood silently along both sides of the road. No command had been given. No protocol required it. Respect moved faster than regulations. Isaiah looked through the window in disbelief. I didn't ask for this. Admiral Cross smiled gently. We know. That's exactly why they're doing it. When Isaiah stepped from the vehicle, the plaza remained completely silent. No applause. No speeches. Only hundreds of sailors standing at attention. The Admiral walked to the center of the formation. Chief Petty Officer Isaiah Mercer. Isaiah stepped forward for extraordinary heroism during the USS Resolute disaster and for a lifetime of quiet service afterward. The United States Navy hereby restores your official record in full. An officer presented a new service folder. Inside were freshly printed military records. Every missing commendation had been restored. Every classified notation that could legally be released had been updated. Every act of valor now appeared where it had always belonged. Isaiah slowly turned the pages. He stopped when he reached one familiar line. Recommended for the Navy Cross. Below it, someone had recently added another sentence. Recommendation approved for formal review following declassification. Isaiah looked toward Admiral Cross. You didn't have to do this. The Admiral answered softly. No, we should have done it years ago. Commander Rachel Reese stepped forward, carrying a small shadow box. Inside rested the burned identification tag, the rescued wristwatch, a restored copy of the USS Resolute photograph, and Daniel Reese's original letter, now preserved beneath archival glass. Rachel handed the case to Isaiah. My father trusted you to protect these. I want you to keep protecting them. Isaiah smiled. I think it's time they belong to all of us. He turned toward the Naval Museum standing beside the harbor. They should tell the story, so future sailors understand that courage isn't measured by who gets remembered, but by who chooses to do the right thing when nobody is watching. The Admiral nodded. They'll have a permanent place. As twilight settled over Norfolk Harbor, the survivors of the USS Resolute gathered for one final photograph. This time, there were fewer faces than 27 years earlier. Age had taken many of their friends, but those who remained stood shoulder to shoulder beside Isaiah once again. The camera shutter clicked. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, the hero at the center of the photograph no longer stood in the shadows. He stood exactly where history had always intended him to be. 3 months later, autumn arrived in Norfolk. The maple trees surrounding the Naval Museum had begun turning shades of gold and crimson. Visitors moved quietly through the newly opened exhibition honoring the men of the USS Resolute. Children stopped before the restored photograph. Veterans lingered in front of the burned identification tag. Families read Daniel Reese's final letter displayed beside a simple bronze plaque. Unlike the large memorials celebrating famous battles, this exhibit carried a different title. Promises kept. There were no oversized portraits, no dramatic music, no claims that one man had changed history alone. Instead, every display reminded visitors that courage was often built from ordinary decisions made during extraordinary moments. Near the entrance stood a glass case containing Isaiah Mercer's faded Navy bag. The torn shoulder strap had not been repaired. The rain stains remained visible. So did the worn patches from decades of use. A small note beneath the display read, "This bag carried memories, promises, and the belongings of men who never returned home. Its greatest value was never what it contained, but the integrity of the man who carried it." Isaiah had insisted those words be engraved. Every week, Rachel Reese volunteered at the museum. She often found herself standing beside her father's letter, answering questions from visitors. One afternoon, a teenage cadet asked quietly, "Weren't you angry that Mr. Mercer waited so many years to deliver the letter?" Rachel smiled. "I used to think I would be." She looked toward the display. "But then I realized something. He wasn't keeping my father from us. He was protecting a promise until the world was finally ready to understand it." The young cadet nodded thoughtfully before walking away. Across town, Officer Kyle Denton had become the department's newest ethics instructor for incoming recruits. During every academy class, he showed no names and no dramatic headlines. Instead, he presented one simple photograph, a torn evidence bag lying beside a cedar box. He always asked the same question. At what moment does a mistake become misconduct? The room was usually silent. Then Kyle would answer it himself. The moment pride becomes more important than the truth. The lesson soon became mandatory throughout the department. Months earlier, Chief Eleanor Brooks had announced sweeping reforms. Every patrol officer would receive additional training on procedural fairness, evidence preservation, and implicit bias. Body camera review policies were strengthened. Evidence logs became subject to automatic audits. Anonymous reporting channels were expanded to protect officers who spoke up against misconduct. During the announcement, Chief Brooks never tried to defend the department's failures. Instead, she repeated one sentence that reporters would quote for weeks. Public trust isn't protected by pretending we never fail. It's protected by what we choose to do after we fail. Meanwhile, Brent Harlow's criminal case quietly moved through the court. He eventually accepted responsibility for evidence tampering and falsifying official reports. As part of his plea agreement, he permanently surrendered his law enforcement certification. Few newspapers covered the final hearing. The public had largely moved on. Isaiah certainly had. When reporters repeatedly requested interviews, he politely declined. When television producers offered documentary contracts, he refused those too. "The story isn't about me," he always said. "It's about keeping promises." Instead of giving speeches, Isaiah returned to his small workshop overlooking the harbor. Boat engines once again filled the room. Children from local schools visited on Saturdays to learn how marine engines work. Veterans still arrived carrying broken motors they couldn't afford to replace. Isaiah continued repairing them free of charge. Nothing about his daily life became extravagant. Only one thing changed. The workshop wall, where dozens of thank you letters already hung, now held one additional frame. Inside, it rested a handwritten note from Admiral Nathaniel Cross. It contained only a few lines. "Dear Isaiah, history sometimes buries the truth beneath silence. Thank you for reminding all of us that honor survives as long as even one person refuses to abandon it. With deepest respect, Nathaniel Cross." Isaiah never spoke publicly about the letter. He simply smiled whenever he walked past it. One cool evening, Rachel stopped by the workshop carrying 2 cups of coffee. She found Isaiah watching the sunset over the harbor. The water reflected shades of orange and deep blue. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, Rachel broke the silence. "My father would have loved this view." Isaiah nodded. "He did." She smiled. "You still answer every question with as few words as possible." Isaiah chuckled softly. "Some habits stay with sailors." Rachel looked toward the old dock. "Do you ever wish people had known the truth sooner?" Isaiah thought carefully before answering. "I used to. But if I'd spent my life chasing recognition..." He glanced toward the museum standing proudly across the harbor. "I might have forgotten why we did what we did." Rachel followed his gaze. "The museum tells your story now." Isaiah shook his head gently. "No, it tells our story. The men who didn't make it home, the families who kept waiting, the friends who never broke a promise." As the last sunlight disappeared beyond the water, a group of young Navy recruits walked past the museum. One noticed Isaiah standing by the harbor. Without saying a word, the recruit raised a respectful salute. The others followed. Isaiah returned the salute with quiet humility. No television cameras captured the moment. No reporters wrote about it. No headlines appeared the next morning. And somehow, that made it perfect. Because true honor had never depended on applause. It lived in character. It survived in integrity. And it endured every time an ordinary person chose to do what was right, even when no one was watching. Isaiah Mercer had carried an old Navy bag for 27 years. In the end, the greatest thing he carried was never inside the canvas. It was the weight of a promise. And by keeping that promise, he reminded an entire nation that the strongest legacy any person can leave behind is not fame, but a life worthy of being remembered.